Imagine waking up and discovering that the world has moved forward 19 years without you. That's exactly what happened to Mark Thompson in a small Minnesota hospital. For nearly 2 decades, his daughter Sarah sat by his bedside every Sunday, watching life pass by while her father remained frozen in time. Then, on an ordinary afternoon in 2014, the impossible happened. Mark opened his eyes. But this isn't just a story about a miracle. What happened next would shake a family to its core. After days of barely being able to speak, Mark Thompson whispered something to his daughter, a secret he had carried for 30 years. A secret so devastating that it would unravel everything Sarah thought she knew about her family. What could be so important that it survived 19 years in a coma? And why did Mark choose to reveal it now after all this time? Time seems to move differently in hospital rooms. The steady beep of monitors, the shuffle of nurses' feet in the hallway, the quiet whir of machines keeping loved ones alive. It all blends together into an endless loop of waiting. For Sarah Thompson, this loop lasted 19 years. Every Sunday since she was 16, Sarah would sit in room 304 of St. Mary's Hospital in Minnesota, reading to her father. Sometimes she'd bring his favorite books, worn copies of Kurt Vonnegut novels. Other times she'd tell him about her week, her nursing studies, or the changing seasons outside his window. But for 988 Sundays, Mark Thompson never responded. The doctors had been clear from the start. The chances of Mark ever waking up were slim to none. The accident that put him in this state had been severe. On that rainy October night in 1995, his car had somehow veered off the road and wrapped itself around an old oak tree. The fact that he survived it all was considered miraculous. But Sarah never gave up hope. Even as her mother Linda moved on, divorcing Mark and relocating to Florida, Sarah remained. She even became a nurse at St. Mary's, allowing her to check on her father between shifts. Her colleagues admired her dedication, though some whispered that she was wasting her life waiting for a miracle that would never come. Then, on what seemed like just another quiet Sunday afternoon in 2014, something changed. Sarah was reading from Slaughterhouse-Five when she noticed it. A slight twitch in her father's fingers. At first she thought she was imagining things as she had so many times before, but then his eyelids fluttered. Within hours, Mark Thompson did what medical science said was nearly impossible. He woke up. The hospital erupted into controlled chaos. Doctors rushed in and out, running tests and expressing amazement at Mark's cognitive functions. He could understand where he was, recognized Sarah immediately, and seemed to comprehend that significant time had passed. But speaking was difficult. His muscles had weakened after nearly 2 decades of disuse. Sarah immediately called her mother in Florida. Linda's reaction was strange. There was shock, yes, but something else in her voice. Was it fear? Still, she promised to fly up immediately. As the days passed, Mark grew stronger, though he remained eerily quiet. The doctors said this was normal, that speech would return gradually. But Sarah noticed something troubling. Whenever she mentioned her mother's upcoming visit, her father's heart rate would spike on the monitors. She assumed it was the shock of learning about the divorce, but something felt off. When Linda finally arrived, the tension in the room was palpable. Mark's entire body went rigid as Linda approached his bed. When she reached for his hand, he pulled away so violently that he nearly knocked over his IV stand. The nurses had to ask Linda to leave, saying Mark's heart rate was dangerously elevated. What was going on? The man Sarah knew 19 years ago had been deeply in love with her mother. She remembered how he used to surprise Linda with flowers, how they would dance in the kitchen while making dinner. Had the divorce really changed things that much? But as Sarah would soon discover, nothing about her parents' marriage had been what it seemed. As Sarah dug through old photo albums trying to understand her father's reaction, memories began surfacing. Little things she'd dismissed as a teenager. Her mother's frequent business trips to Florida, sometimes lasting weeks. The hushed phone calls behind closed doors. The way Linda would sometimes seem distant, distracted, as if her mind were somewhere else entirely. Sarah started asking questions around town. Had anyone noticed anything unusual about her parents' relationship before the accident? Most people just shrugged, offering sympathetic smiles. But Mrs. Henderson, their old neighbor, hesitated when Sarah mentioned Florida. "Your mother used to go there a lot, didn't she?" Mrs. Henderson said carefully. Even before everything happened. Before Sarah could probe further, her phone rang. Her father was asking for her. When she arrived at the hospital, she found him more agitated than usual. His hands trembled as he motioned for her to come closer. For the first time since waking up, he seemed determined to speak. What he whispered next would shatter Sarah's world forever. With trembling lips, Mark Thompson revealed that his accident hadn't been an accident at all. He had discovered something about Linda, something so shocking that he had confronted her the very night of the crash. Linda had been living a double life, splitting her time between two families. She had another husband in Florida, other children. When Mark threatened to expose her, she had tampered with his brake lines. Sarah stumbled back from the bed, her mind reeling. It couldn't be true. Her mother, the woman who had taught her to ride a bike, who had kissed her scraped knees and made chicken soup when she was sick, couldn't be capable of such a thing. But as Sarah began investigating, the pieces fell into place with terrifying clarity. She found old photographs hidden in the attic. Linda with another man and children, dating back to before Sarah was even born. Bank statements showing regular transfers to an account in Florida. And most damning of all, mechanical records from their old car, showing it had been serviced just days before the crash. The brake lines had been perfectly fine. When confronted with the evidence, Linda broke down. The truth poured out in a torrent of tears and justifications. She had fallen in love with two men, couldn't bear to choose between her families. When Mark discovered the truth and threatened to tell everyone, she had panicked. She never meant for him to be hurt so badly, just enough to keep him quiet. The police were called. Linda was arrested, charged with attempted murder. As she was led away in handcuffs, Sarah caught a glimpse of her mother's face. The same face that had smiled at her over breakfast countless mornings, now twisted with guilt and fear. In the aftermath, Sarah and Mark began the long process of healing. Physical therapy helped Mark regain his strength, but the emotional wounds would take longer to mend. How do you rebuild a life after learning that everything you believed was a lie? Yet somehow, they found their way forward. Sarah continued her nursing work, though she transferred to a different hospital. Too many memories haunted the halls of St. Mary's. Mark moved in with her and slowly, they created a new kind of normal. Linda awaits trial now, her double life finally exposed to both families. And Sarah? She's learned that sometimes the greatest acts of love come after the greatest betrayals. Every Sunday, she still sits with her father, reading Vonnegut. But now, he squeezes her hand when she reaches the good parts. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. Others find their way to the surface no matter how long it takes. Mark Thompson's truth survived 19 years in the darkness of a coma, waiting for the right moment to come to light. And when it did, it changed everything.